I am absolutely thrilled to have three of my favorite people and most innovative speakers join us today for a wonderful webinar, Navigating Your Personal Finances in a Time of Uncertainty. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Craig Lemoine. I'm a certified financial planner and MRFC professional. I direct the financial planning undergraduate program at the University of Illinois. I'm an associate clinical professor of financial planning as well. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be with these wonderful panelists today. So if y'all want to introduce yourselves in order on the slide, that would be awesome.
I'm Dr. Mary Bell-Carlson. I also am a certified financial planner as well as an accredited financial counselor. My background is in financial planning as well as really financial communication, financial therapy, really working and talking through difficult financial situations like we're in now. I am a full-time mom, part-time professor. I actually work for University of Georgia and Texas Tech on an adjunct basis. And I'm also the CEO of a blog called Chief Financial Mom, and enjoy the work that to be able to help moms in various financial positions and have better communications.
And I am Dr. Ajamu Loving. I'm also a certified financial planner. I am an assistant professor of finance at the University of North Texas at Dallas. I'm also, we are in the development stages of a financial planning program at the university, and I'm a former financial planner and also have a public speaking and consulting business. So thanks for having me.
I'm Dr. Jim Peterson, and I have too many degrees and designations to go over, but I am a certified financial planner. Currently, I'm the professor of leadership and ethics at the American College of Financial Services in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I just realized that yesterday was my 37th year in the industry. I've been in corporate life and academic life, and very excited to be with y'all.
Well, thank y'all so much for joining us today. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have these great minds to talk about the world around us at a real time of uncertainty. So the first thing I wanted to get into today is the suddenness with which our world has changed and trying to adapt to the speed of that suddenness. I absolutely love this slide because it gets across to me something very important. That New Year's Eve, how many of us thought that we'd be where we are today? How many of us thought that the world would change around us so fast? You know, as a college professor, the university I work for, there are no students on campus anymore. Everything has gone online. You know, fraternities, sororities have dissolved. Student clubs are no more. There's a lot of social capital that's just gone in a heartbeat, in a flash, from the end of my perspective, much less my family perspective, where all of us are home and the girls' school is canceled. And you know, it's all about, you know, homeschooling and balancing children and life now. And on New Year's Eve, there's no way I would have told you that this was going to happen. I would have bet against it with almost every penny in my pocket. But the speed that change has happened has really caused us to be uncertain and in these uncertain times. And so, Ajamu, you had some comments you wanted to make here too.
Well, first of all, I just absolutely love this graphic. It really is. It's so well done. All right. And I think the suddenness is a great point. And I think when people see this, they think about the catastrophic nature of a huge asteroid hitting Earth. And I think that's what people think has happened and will happen. But I think we also know from movies with Ben Affleck that if an asteroid of that size actually hit the Earth, it would be an existential threat for all humankind. Life on Earth would be ruined as we know it. And so this is not that, right? And so even though it's an excellent graphic, it's important to recognize that life will go on after this. And even with the most grim, the most grim interpretations of what's likely to happen, we still move on with life after this. And so this is not the time to panic or assume that everything is completely over. Even though this has caught us completely unaware, it's important to recognize that we will move on after this.
Well, thank you, Ajamu. What I'd like to start off on today is sort of a graph of how things are wonky in the world around us. I think if I had to pick one word, I'd go with that. This graph represents a couple of things. The first thing it represents is it says, okay, each of these dots represents how much our stock market swings in an average day. All right. And so what each dot says is it says, all right, so if you took the 500 largest stocks in the United States and you track their value from day to day, then how much they swing in a day, usually they swing about 1% in a day. So if the previous day, if you added everything up and it was, let's say, 1,000, and then the next day it would be 1,010 or 990, right? The stock market usually moves between -1 and 1% in a day. And that's what you see with these bands that we have in place. Now, what's been happening lately is we have not had a day inside these bands in a very long time. It's been about 3 weeks now of the stock market swinging way, way, way outside of these normal bands. And so what's the world has been for the last 3 weeks is a period of uncertainty that I've never seen before. And my career is not as long as Dr. Peterson's career. I've seen the 2001 financial crisis. I've seen the 2008 financial crisis. I haven't seen anything like this. And what's happening from a consumer economics perspective is that we just don't know what's next. And you're seeing the stock market react to uncertainty. So a week ago Monday, we fell 12%. That is such a big drop that it would require an entire additional slide being taped to the left side of your computer in order to show how far that drop was. 2 days ago, the market went up by 9%, and you would have to tape a piece of paper to the right side of your monitor to illustrate that drop or that rise. The point being that the stock market doesn't know what's next. We don't know what's next. Our economy doesn't know what's next. So what happened last night? Well, the Senate has agreed to a federal stimulus package. At the same time, California announced 1 million unemployed people. Those two bits of news conflict greatly, and no one really knows what's next. Now, one other comment I'll make on this slide before we move on. Why is it important? Why do we really care what the market is? Not everybody is an investor in the stock market. This is why it's important. The stock market, from an economic perspective, is something called a leading indicator. In other words, the stock market tends to predict the health of our economy. So when you have the stock market go up for a year, generally our economy makes more goods and services and widgets than it did the year before. That's why it's important that we follow this to some extent, even if we're not invested. The stock market tends to tell us where our economy will go. So after 9 years of things going well, that's 9 years that our economy has made more goods and services, more widgets, and more things, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. The fact that our stock market's down 30% this year tells us that perhaps our economy will shrink by around 30% in the future. And that's what we're starting to see with very, very large unemployment numbers in California and Ohio, and as other states roll theirs in as well. It is an uncertain time. And that uncertain time has made the world around us very volatile. It's made the world around us not very predictable. From day to day, we don't really know what's next. Anyone else want to chip in a little here?
Well, businesses and investors love certainty, right? It's a forward-looking activity when you purchase any stock. You are planning on buying it based on your perception of the cash flows that are coming in, and you're discounting each one of those expected cash flows by a rate which, to a certain extent, includes the risk associated with it. And so all of the risks of asteroid-sized coronavirus interpretations of what's going on are coloring what people think is going to happen with those cash flows. And that's why you see these huge movements. And so I think you explained it well. And I think it's important to recognize that we're probably going to see a bit more of this, and to be ready for that.
I did want to give a little hope early on in this webinar. I want you to focus in on the last line of this graph, this chart here. that our economy does have these fluctuations where the stock market drops by 20% or more. And then, of course, our economy's goods and services that it makes tends to recede by 20% or more as well. But here's the hope. Here's the silver lining. Here's the good news. Is that, yes, we may be on the cusp of a recession. Yes, states are announcing 500,000, million people unemployed. That's really not a good thing. But please keep with you and please keep the hope that on average, about 341 days is what it takes for us to recover from a market downturn. So generally speaking, every few years, the market goes down and it takes about a year for it to go back up again. So please understand that this is built into our economy. This is how it works. It's how it's always worked. And the silver lining here is that if you're listening to this webinar and you're a senior in college and you're going, man, am I gonna be able to find a job? Well, the answer is maybe. But know that in 341 days, in about a year, things get back where they were. When we go back to the last big financial crisis in 2008, by late 2009, the economy had started kicking again and had gotten back on track. So know that this is a temporary situation. And please take that with you as in our webinar today, that this is temporary. And the average length of a recovery takes about a year. But is it only about a year? This isn't 800 days. This isn't 1,000 days. This is 300 days. So keep this with you that historically speaking, it's about a year to get back on track when things get upset.
Craig and Ajamu have been talking about the emotional market, and we're definitely in an emotional market. So first of all, we want to tell you that it's okay to have these concerns during the market. And as you can see from this slide, that in an up market cycle, we have excitement. In a down market cycle, we have fear. And certainly there is a lot of fear because of that uncertainty that we've been talking about. But having invested and gone through most of the market ups and downs over the last 35 years, I can tell you that many people get so fearful that they jump out in a down market and lose and never get back in. And that certainly happened in 2008. So the key here is to stay calm. I can tell you I'm calm having invested in these markets. Yes, there's uncertainty, and you will have to make a decision as to what you do. But understand that these feelings are normal and everybody goes through them. And I'd like to talk about two biases that are a part of our markets and what we go through. So Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and I would recommend it to all of you. One of the things that he found in his research that down markets or losses hurt 2 times as much as up markets or gains cause people to feel well. So this fear that you're feeling, if you are feeling this fear and not knowing what to do, understand that they're intensified. And here is why they're intensified. There are a lot of different biases, but he talks about the availability bias. And that is that because the information is available to us, things come readily to our minds that are more representative than the case. In other words, because the coronavirus is in the news so frequently, we feel that there's a catastrophe coming, not realizing that we've had flu epidemics before and they've caused similar problems. Now, I'm not trying to downplay this because the intensity is a little bit greater here, maybe a lot greater. The other thing is recency bias, is that people easily remember things that recently happened compared to something that occurred a while back. And we had, as Craig just said, we had a great market for 9 years, but because of the recent drops and the volatility in the market, what comes to mind is that this is a highly volatile market and it will stay that way. And that is not the case. Up markets tend to last longer than down markets, as we've seen. So we will come out of this. When? No one knows for sure, but we will come out of it, and we want to keep the faith.
So what I wanted to get into, the next part of this webinar is really for you about what we think. The four of us kind of put our minds together. What should you do right now? What should you do in this time of uncertainty? And what can you tell your friends, your family? If you're a financial advisor on the call, what could you tell your clients? And we'd really like to dig in a little bit to what can you do from here? You know, traditional thinking, stay the course. When this first started to happen, we saw a lot of advisors with a little smugness of, you know, okay, well, I told you to buy a diversified portfolio, just hold it, you'll be fine. I think we're at a point now where we may adjust direction with the wind behind us, right? We can't necessarily control the wind, but we can definitely channel the wind and harness it and point us in the right direction. So now I want to spend some time with some of our experts and get into some ideas that we've got for you that, again, we can maybe make things a little better and where we go from here. So I'd like to kick off with this and get into a little bit on passing it to Dr. Mary Bell-Carlson about where to go, Mary, and what's a spending plan? And I really loved your ideas on that.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that you can do is control the things that you can control and let the rest of it go. So right now, you probably don't feel like no one can control the markets, as we've just talked about, or has a crystal ball to be able to predict. So it might be a good time to step away and stop checking the markets for a while and turn to something that you can. And one of the things that you can is you can sit down and figure out how much money do I have coming in, if any at all, and if not, what are my next steps? And so one of the things you can do is create what I call a spending plan. It's not like a budget. Budgets or diets, nobody wants to do it, but it's sitting down and saying, here's what I've got coming in for the next 2 weeks or month. Here's what my most urgent necessary needs are. And this would be a list of 3 to 5 top priorities. I would bet food is probably one of the top priorities for everyone now, to make sure that you have enough. We're not looking at hoarding or storing up for the next 6 months, but instead look at the things you actually need and that you're going to be consuming. The next thing would be a roof over your head, to make sure that you and your family are safe and comfortable. Whatever those 3 to 5 top priorities for you right now are, put those at the very, very top of that bucket. Because in order for you to be able to make it, some people, their paychecks have been cut in half. Some people have no paycheck coming in at all. And so whatever that is for you, it now is not the time to panic. Now is just time to put pen to paper and figure out what you actually can spend and where that money's going to go. I think a lot of times we become ostriches in the sand, for lack of a better term, and we forget that we can actually control things. So instead of ignoring it and pretending it'll go away, take hold. This is something you can control and take reins of. You have the power to spend and not to spend. This is a great time to forecast and say, okay, here's what we have coming in for the next month. And then on the back end, go ahead and keep track of where your money's actually going, so that you have that reconciliation between the prediction of where you want that money to go and then the actuality of where it actually went. And this is a great thing to do both in times of feast and famine, to be able to figure out where your money's going and how you're actually spending. I think a lot of times we think we know, we do a lot of mental accounting and we think we know where things are going. But really, when you sit down and put pen to paper, you'll realize it may not be in alignment with what your priorities, and your priorities have probably shifted in the last couple of weeks. For things that seemed really important a few weeks ago, probably on our lower on the list now. So go ahead and reprioritize whatever those things are for you and your family and your needs, and make sure that those needs are the top ones getting met.
Thank you, Mary. And Ajamu, I love your perspective here. As you're quite the athlete yourself, and I kind of like to get into this idea of routine. You know, this is one that when I first was home, the first couple of weeks, you know, we pulled the kids out. They had the flu a few weeks ago, and the actual flu, not this virus. So I'm going on week 3 now of home, Craig. You know, routine goes a long way. And while it may not be sort of a general financial planning concept, I think it's important to mention here that routine can really make the difference between kind of struggling with some mental health issues and maybe having more clarity to the day, having more structure to the day. And so,
Yeah,
John, I know you've been really working out a lot. If you could share a little more about routine and how that's
yeah.
worked for you and some
Well,
advice you might give
I mean,
friends.
it's funny because routine has been interrupted in some cases. So I'm a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner in that activity. I just got my black belt from Carlos Machado. Those of you that know jiu-jitsu know that that's a huge deal. And I would love to be rolling right now, but I can't because it involves two sweaty people spending way too much time engaged way too close, right? So it's impossible for me to do what my routine has been. But I've employed a new routine. I dusted off my Insanity DVDs and I've been doing those. And that's a pretty stimulating workout. And I think taking care of yourself and stimulating yourself physically is an important part of what's going on here. And to the point about routine and even the finances, when Mary was talking about your spending plan, now's a good time to check your auto debits and check your memberships and check things that you might be spending, things that are coming out of your account, that memberships that you haven't even used in a long time, and money that's just draining that you could really start to build your emergency fund with right now. So financially, routines in terms of building positive ones can be great, but sometimes we can fall into routines even financially that aren't necessarily constructive to us going forward. And especially in times like these, you need to marshal all of your resources. So you want to make sure that if you have things that you are paying for that you could alter, you could change, maybe paying a huge cable bill, or use somebody else's Netflix account, which I'm sure all of you college students are doing. All of those things can be helpful for you, but taking care of yourself above all. Once this is over, and even as we go through it, our bodies are the vehicle that we are fortunate enough to be able to transport ourselves through life in, and we have to take care of them. And I think working out and exerting yourself physically gives you those endorphins that you need in times like this. So,
John,
Ajamu, you are exactly right. And for those of you who are working out and finding a way to do it, great. Those of you who aren't, this is a great way to relieve stress in your life. Just get away from all the things you've been thinking about and get yourself in shape. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, and I would even add too a shout out for all the moms out there that have gone from all their many activities to now being also a school teacher on top of it. I think that part of this is also just having a routine, and that brings some consistency and calmness to not just yourself, but to your family as well. It gives children something to look forward to. They know I've got a 2 and a 4-year-old right now, and they want to know, what are we doing today, Mom? And so having that consistent routine that maybe doesn't deviate quite as much, it's going to change. And sure, it's going to look different than their typical school day. But this is what I think we have right now is something called the gift of time. And how are you going to use that time and make the most of it, whether for yourself or with your family, and hopefully together.
And one closing comment on this, I would like to add, and thank you, Andrea, from the audience. One of the things on memberships and things like that, do keep in mind the local gyms that you joined and you've been a part of and have supported you, the YMCA, if that's something you use. We're keeping our membership, even though we can't go right now, because it's been such a big part of our family and life. So do keep that in mind, right? The small businesses that kind of rely on that monthly membership, can be very, very important. And, if they're there for you, you can think about it if you do have excess in times like this. All right.
And Craig, just one more thing too. A lot of times with those memberships, they are going back. I've seen quite a few memberships we belong to that are going to give extra time or not charge during this time that you're not going. So just do check those things before you jump.
yeah, I wasn't suggesting that you stop joining, stop the gym. I'm talking about other things that,
Right.
websites and things of that nature, things that you might not have even been paying attention to in terms of financially. Just look at your your bank account and make sure there aren't things that you are paying for that you haven't used and have no intention of using going forward.
Like the Hulu account that I don't know the password to.
There you go.
Okay, so the next thing I want to jump into is staying healthy. And earlier, Dr. Peterson brought up the idea of kind of Kahneman and Tversky, and we talked about some biases. But I'd really like to get into the behavioral finance idea here. When we check things we cannot control, and in this case, our retirement plans. And I know, Mary, you've got some incredible things to say on this slide too. When we check things that we can't control, the first thing that happens is a bit of anxiety, a bit of anger, a bit of upsetness that can occur. I know what my 401k balance was in January, and I know that the market's down 30%. So I have a pretty good idea of what my 401k balance is now. But all of a sudden, when I check, there's a sense of loss. And we call it disutility in the economic world. But there's a real anger and frustration and stress. And oh my gosh, I've just lost 2 years of my work. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna, that's I can't retire anymore where I was planning on. Of course, I'm in my 40s. I don't really have retirement in the future. But that's the kind of thing where if you look, you're gonna do more harm than good because you can't control it. And the worst thing you can do right now is say, okay, I'm looking at this. I can't stand to lose anymore. I'm going all to cash or I'm going all to bonds. And I'm not giving specific investment advice here to the group, but please understand that right now bond yields are around 1% and inflation is 3%. So, I mean, if you're going to switch to something that I can't handle this volatility anymore, and what, you're going to get 1% a year? You're going to miss it when it turns back around and you're going to make less than inflation rate? Like, just not checking is actually a viable strategy here, as long as you're allocated as you planned ahead of time. Mary, you had some incredible things to say.
Just to add to that, it's not only not checking, but this is the time to not drain your retirement account. I remember a 2008 downturn, someone reaching out to me and saying, hey, what do I do with my 401k? It's down right now. I want to pull it all out and use the money. Let me tell you right now, let me explain something because I think sometimes this gets confusing. It's not your 401k or your Roth IRA or whatever that may be that is down right now. It's not just your retirement plan. It is the entire stock market. So don't think that it's just yours going down. And I think that's great advice to not check it. The second thing is you cannot drain it. So we talk about how things go on sale. It also means if you were to drain it right now, you're also going to lose any gains that you've had. It's also going to be down 30%. And this is the time too. I would put that at the very last. There are other resources to go to if you are strapped financially right now that have to come before you drain your retirement account. And that goes for whether you're 20 years old, 40 years old, or 60 years old. I think it's really important to stay the course on this and not touch that retirement account. And that includes both contributions, if at all possible, keep contributing. Don't stop, as well as on the back end, don't drain it. Don't let it go.
Fantastic. I know that oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one here. Well, I know that one of the temptations I've seen in class is to my students have said, oh, Bitcoin's cheap now. Can I buy Bitcoin? Can I get in the stock market? Is now a good time to buy? And Jim, you had probably one of the most staggering things to say about this. And the answer really is that Jim's gonna run with this on Dr. Peterson, kind of on a separation point, and then if you are going to be buying, how to go about it.
Yes, basically you want to put time between your impulses and your actions. If you are operating on impulse, you are not giving the cognitive part or the thinking part of your brain time to make decisions that will be in your best interest. So impulsive buying is very short term, and we're going to talk about next the long term of what you should be doing and what you should be thinking about. And so basically, and go ahead, Craig, to the next slide, if you're certain about the future, there are certain things that you can do and you should do, and that has to do with buying and selling. But we're in a time of very much uncertainty, and dollar cost averaging is a way to take advantage of volatile markets. Now, this actual slide comes from Michael Kitces, and this slide actually, he was making the point that lump sum investing does better than dollar cost averaging over the long term. And the reason for that is, and I'll talk about dollar cost averaging in a moment, the reason for that is what Craig said before, and I emphasize that down markets generally are shorter than up markets. If you know you're going to have an up market and over the long term, lump sum investing works well. But dollar cost averaging has been successful, and Michael Kitces agrees with this, in bear markets and highly volatile markets. So if you have money to invest, putting a certain amount in on a regular basis will allow you to take advantage of those swings in the market. If you have a need for the money, taking money out in a dollar cost averaging kind of fashion will allow you to take advantage of some of the highs in the market as the market goes up and down. So think long term when it comes to investing. And as Ajamu said, this isn't a catastrophic time. We have not been in this kind of market condition before, but we have been in volatile market conditions. And the question you need to ask yourself, are the fundamentals in this country still sound as we go forward? If you're certain about that answer, you can make decisions accordingly. If you're uncertain, take a look at dollar cost averaging.
And, to that end, most wealth in the United States is built on dollar cost averaging, right? I would say a majority of us invest a little bit with every paycheck. And there's no difference now than there was before. But I'd like to talk a little more about scarcity and sort of the emotional trap of scarcity and buying. One of the things that really surprised me about the world we're in was really just kind of the toilet paper scarcity that happened. All of a sudden we're sort of worried about toilet paper, but yet to me that is a trap that's very easy to get into. When we go to the grocery store, when we go to Target, when we go to Costco, there is sort of a very emotional raw impulse that happens. If you pass the bacon and there's only one pack of bacon left and it's not even on your list, all of a sudden that bacon, oh, do I need this? Do I need this bacon? It's the last bacon. What if I don't get this bacon? I can't get bacon anymore. Is my family going to starve because I can't get bacon? There's a very impulsive emotional construct that starts to happen when we see an empty shelf, to the point where it can be very dangerous for us financially, dangerous for us on sort of a bad to the community standpoint too. And Mary, you had some fantastic thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it's important that now is not the time to jump in and figure out your 6-month meal plans, right? Now is really the time to make sure that you're sufficiently meeting yours and your family's needs, whatever that may be. And I think that there's a lot of herd mentality in this. If everyone else is doing it, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to. For example, we know right now shortages of milk, shortages of eggs. Well, guess what? If you're lactose intolerant, you don't need the milk, whether everyone else is buying it or not. If it's not something you're going to use, don't buy into that same mentality. You don't need 10 Costco-size rolls of toilet paper to make it through the epidemic. The other side is use what you need. For example, you don't need 10 gallons of milk if it's you and your spouse, right? You're probably not going to make it through all 10 gallons before that is ruined. So I think it's just really important. And again, we're talking about food here, but then that has a direct impact on your budget. So the main part is if you're planning on your spending, just like I mentioned before, plan that out. And yes, you might get an extra week's worth or whatever that may be. So you're not having to run out all the time and grab something. At the same time, plan wisely. And I think that's, again, something you can control. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean you have to. Get what you need and fit your needs in, not because the media is telling you to do it or other people on social media are saying that they're doing it as well.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with all of the hoarding is that it really amounts to overspending. And so there are people who are out there who, bought ridiculous amounts of rice and beans and thinking that this really was an apocalyptic type of event. And then what happens when you don't have the money for the other things that you need, the shelter, the ability to move around, to get yourself to some of the employment and other economic opportunities that are starting to become available in this changing market. Okay, so don't leash yourself to the point where you're actually going to have to use that toilet paper as furniture now because you don't have any other options because you went crazy. And that's the thing that I think we're all trying to get at here is that these are emotional times. They're volatile in terms of the asset values, but you need to perform steadily in terms of what your goals are and what it is that you'd like to accomplish so that you can get out of this whole thing better off than you came into it. And I think that's just that's a way of life for people who are successful. They act in ways that are going to be edifying to them and don't react to the environment in ways that harm themselves or their families.
And Ajamu, I think another point to add between this slide and the last slide on dollar cost averaging, it's the same concept, right? You're buying into that retirement plan little by little and moving forward. The same thing with food. I am all about having food storage, and I think it's a great thing. But it doesn't mean you buy it all today. You buy little bits over time and it builds up. And that's the same thing we're saying with a retirement plan. Continue to put a little bit in over time and you'll see amazing results.
Well, and I think that also plays on the media, right? And I think that's a good segue. Thank you for that, Mary Ajamu. One of the things we're looking at here is that the media doesn't really help. It helps encourage that impulse, the difference between action and impulse. And I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but turning off the TV, it's important that we check for local news. It's important that we look at local ordinances. It's important, on a lot of levels to check the community and make sure everyone's healthy and see how you maybe help. Or if you're going to do takeout tonight, maybe there's a local business that really needs it and they put out some press release on that end. But the media doesn't necessarily help things. It can definitely add to impulse and a little franticness sometimes.
Hey, Craig, also, if you look at this slide, if you wait 9 years, you're going to be right if you keep saying the same thing over and over again.
That's true. Yeah.
So one other thing I really think is important is that, personally, we've seen loss. My spouse Liz lost her job and last week over email. She was doing dental hygiene in public schools and they said, well, you're no longer needed. So thank you and have a good day. And, unemployment insurance all of a sudden came into play for my household. And unemployment insurance really is a very important element. And I know that there's a mix of everybody on this call and webinar today. But one of the things that financial planners often kick the can on is public benefits. All right, we're kind of too busy. A lot of the time we call it wealth management. We just talk about portfolios, and that's a fault to what financial advisors do. But I think it's very important right now that all of us, from a family standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, from a client standpoint, from an advisor standpoint, understand the employment benefits in the state we live in. Not everyone's going to qualify for unemployment benefits. In some states, churches and nonprofits don't pay in, and unfortunately, that means that some churches and nonprofits don't. Those employees wouldn't receive benefits on the way out. It's important to understand how the filing system works. If we are in a vulnerable position, and we can send a link there's a really good article that came out today on Vox Media about vulnerable industries right now, and they list about 14. But those vulnerable industries mean, hey, today, California said 1 million Californians have been recently filed for unemployment in the last 2 weeks. Ohio said 500,000, 2 million. And those are only 2 states, right? That's huge numbers. Part of the federal stimulus bill that is currently going through the House does bolster state unemployment programs by giving federal money to those state programs. But we need to understand how it works. We need to understand how to file. And one of the first things that we do, the first bit of advice you have, if you lose your job, if you just lost your job, use the public benefits you have paid into. And unemployment insurance is really the first one of those that comes to mind. File immediately, file as fast as you can. I've counseled clients and I've counseled friends and family in the last 2 weeks that have said, hey, well, if I file, then my employer is going to be mad at me and they may not hire you back. Well, I want you to know that in Illinois anyway, the state has a short-term unemployment program for this crisis already set up. So, it's there. You paid into it. Your employer paid into it. This is a benefit that can keep your family afloat. And I just wanted to share that one comment. The other comment I'd like to make on this slide is, if you have the ability, we've lived in this idea in the last few years that 3 to 6 months of living expenses is adequate, and that we call that an emergency fund. And if you've got the possibility to do that, and if you have one of those, yes, you just sleep a little better at night. And I'm here to say, with the uncertainty and volatility in the world around us, 6 to 12 months should really be the new guideline that we go by. So if you have that ability to start saving that amount, even if it's so much as $50 a month, start saving towards that goal. And I would say that, that idea of 3 to 6 months is something that we need to get past and move on from there.
And I think, Craig, too, it depends on what industry you're in, right? If you're a tenured professor, if you've got a government position, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be dropped. But if you're in the private sector, and very much if you're a freelancer or self-employed, absolutely on the higher end of that. And I think a lot of people kind of get overwhelmed with thinking, I don't have any cash reserves now, so what do I do? And Ajamu, I think you've got a great idea here.
Well, okay, so as you're reaching out to renegotiate with your creditors, right? The credit card companies that you owe money to, now's not the time to just to be trying to pay down balances really aggressively. If you can hold on to your cash as much as possible, great. But the other people that you want to make sure that you reach out to, I call them the HSIs, your ham sandwich investors. These are the friends, the family members, the people who, when times get tough, they are there for you. And when you're hungry, they will make you a ham sandwich. And then when you're homeless, they'll let you sleep on their couch. Okay. So you never, ever want to forget about the people in your life who are in a position to help you and have helped you and are likely to help you, especially when your credit was bad and nobody else would. Okay, so do not start dodging their calls. In fact, now's the time to call them. Tell them, hey, I remember that I owe you that money. I'm not in a position to pay you right now, but I just want you to know that I owe. Or if you do have some money that you can't pay, start paying them back. Okay, and maintain the relationships above all. Remember, people are more important than things. And so you always want to maintain those relationships with people who love you and will help you unconditionally.
Yeah, I think it's important now to talk about, okay, so this is a great idea to have an emergency fund, but I don't, right? And many are in that situation. So before you go to your credit card and jump on that at the highest rate of interest, let me give a few other cash reserves ideas out. I think first off, start with your employer. Right now, there's an infusion of money going into small businesses, hopefully, once the infusion takes place. But go there first. Look, if your employer has short-term loans or maybe pay advance options that are low interest rate or future payments, take advantage of those first. Those are going to be some of the lowest costs you can get, followed by credit unions or local banks, something in your local community. This is the time to reach out locally because they know what's happening in your community and how your individual communities are being hit. This includes your city and county governments. I've already seen things pop up like crazy, helping and reaching out and people asking short-term loans, grants, other things to help you make it through this time, including nonprofits, and some churches are helping with this as well. The other thing to look at right now is make sure if you're expecting a tax refund, yes, the deadline has extended to July, but now is not the time to wait. Jump on that and get that money back now. And you can go ahead and file and receive that payment sooner rather than later. Craig, you've got more on stimulus and what's happened overnight.
Sure. Let's go ahead to that slide, Jim. And so here's the thing. This, again, Jim, if you want to jump in with me on this, this stimulus did pass the Senate, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily ready to go. But we currently have it in the House, and what's going to happen next is there's a proposal right now subject to your AGI. So for those that single under 75,000, married under 150, the current proposal is within 3 weeks, a auto deposit check if you've been paying taxes or receiving tax refunds auto deposit of $1,200 per adult, $500 per child, up to a limit on children. The idea here is there wouldn't be any paperwork. We would just look if you have a social security number and you've been paying your taxes, that it would automatically show up in whatever account refunds have gone into and or payments have gone out of, direct deposit. So this is some kind of stimulus package. Canada has had a similar one happen as well. It is subject to going through the House.
To what Mary was saying before, yes, about filing your taxes, if you have volatile income, so let's say that you made over 75,000 in 2018 or over 150,000 married filing jointly in 2018, they're also going to look at the taxes that you paid in 18 or 19. So if you haven't filed yet, you've had higher income in 18 but lower income in 19, go ahead and file so that you can qualify for this stimulus. Go ahead, Craig.
Yes. And also, they're actually extending it to 2020. So if you lose your job in 2019, they're going to look at your 2020 income. And if that qualifies, then you'll get the money in a year when you file next year. So they really are, this is technically a 2020 tax credit paid early. That's how they're viewing it. So, if you lose your job this year, let's say you made as a family more than $200,000, which would phase you out completely, but then one of you loses your job, next year when you file, that tax credit will be available. So it's a pretty flexible tax credit. It takes into account unemployment. It is not a taxable payment. Yeah, it's something. It just, it might happen, follow the legislation on House and executive. We still have a couple of hurdles to go with it, though.
And Craig, I think the next step, if you'll flip the next slide, are a few things I want you to talk about during hard times. Sometimes, again, we shut down, and now is not the time to do that. It's most important to open up and talk to somebody during this time. Talk about how you're feeling. Talk about what your fears are, what your needs are. The main thing is, especially if you're talking with a spouse or a partner, don't blame each other, right? Don't use the words you always or you never. First of all, no one does anything always or never. And secondly, it's not their fault. You're in this together. In fact, I recommend couples hold hands and walk forward together or sit on the couch. They're facing the same direction, so they're not placing blame on each other or letting those fears overcome what really matters. And that's what Ajamu said earlier, is that relationship. Most importantly, what you've been given right now is the gift of time, and use that gift to enhance those relationships. And no, this isn't going to last for forever. We're going to get through this, but you really ought to take the time to talk and open up and explore and really get to love and know the people around you. Lastly, I want to say, if you're still stuck and say, hey, this is all great and fine and dandy, but I don't know where to go for help, here are three of the top that I would say. Again, start with your employer. Many employers have what they call an employee assistance program or an EAP, and this can vary in types of services, everything from mental health counseling, couples counseling. They can offer relocation assistance. They can offer even financial counseling in specific situations. So reach out through that EAP. The services therein are free, and they're offered from your employer to you. If you don't have an employer that offers it or don't have a job currently, you can go to services by location. I've given you the website. This is the Department of Labor, and it's broken down by county. Please note that a lot of counties in the US are the ones offering these services. And so reach out to your county, whether by a phone call, and just find out what is available for you and what you can do to help. And last but not least, I wanted to put the National Suicide Hotline up. This is during times of economic downturn is when we see suicide rates go up substantially. And this is something very concerning to me. I know that in the farming community, unfortunately, when times are hard on the farm, we see farmers more and more and ranchers commit suicide. And that's the last thing to help at this point in time. So if you're having those feelings or know someone that is, please reach out and please get help. And make sure that you're keeping in touch with each other and checking in on each other, because this is not a time of social isolation. It's a time of social distancing, but that doesn't mean you can't talk. You need to communicate and keep those channels open and get help when you need it.
So our ending thought is if you do have the gift of time, what do you do with the gift of time? One of the things I've been doing with the gift of time is really investing in myself. Now, specifically, I had bought a program called Masterclass. You have to pay for it, but I bought it to use with my students in a classroom. And so I have a membership, and it'll extend through the year. And I've really been enjoying this. Now, what it is of course, you can build up other skill sets and hobbies. And in this case, I've always enjoyed cooking, and that's something I've always liked to do. And so I've been looking more and more at these masterclass cooking videos. And I will say that my salmon game is definitely higher than my salmon game was a month ago. So when we look at investing in yourself, of course, some are free programs. Coursera has a lot of ways to invest your human capital, look at areas of interest, anything from personal finance all the way on to management leadership. You've got LinkedIn Learning, you've got Udacity, you've got edX. LinkedIn Learning bought Lydia, and LinkedIn Learning is an incredible big platform you may not even be aware of, but man, that is huge. And Jim, you may be the most educated and accomplished person that I know. Talk a little bit about kind of your thoughts on investing in yourself and education.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm smoking a pork butt right now, so I can teach you all on that too. But there are so many opportunities, and I know that some of you are in the financial services business, and this is a great time to get designations or degrees through the different organizations that are out there. As many of you know, even the face-to-face schools are now going online using distance learning. So jump in there and look at what opportunities they have. My university has full scholarships for veterans, and there are many, many different opportunities for you to increase your education and keep yourself busy during these times when you might be thinking about other things that won't matter a couple months or a year from now.
And so what we'd like to end on is peace of mind, is that the world is uncertain right now, but if you follow some of the steps that we've got, it can be better. And now I'd like to open it up for questions. I've got a few questions I've been answering privately, but I would like to kind of answer a few more. So I'd like to share a couple of questions with the group. If I don't get to yours, I've got about 8 right now sitting in the queue, but I'll go ahead and please ask any questions you have, and I'm going to toss them to the experts in our group or answer if I'm the one suited for that. So one of the questions I got, which also answers another one, was how should cash on the side, maybe that I have in savings or checking that I don't need for an emergency fund, be invested? And talk a little bit more, clarify what you meant by dollar cost averaging. I think those are good comments. What we mean by dollar cost averaging is that if you have, let's say, $1,000 that you are not needing for an emergency or not needing for an emergency fund, instead of taking that $1,000 and buying a stock or a mutual fund or a bond all at once, you would perhaps put $100 a week in over 10 weeks, right? So you buy that over 10 different periods. So that's kind of what we meant by dollar cost averaging, and that's one of the comments I would make there. So we have a question, Mary, and I think you're the best to answer this. What about food banks as places to turn or places to support?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think on both sides. And again, food banks, what I've seen here in our community here in Washington, D.C. is a lot of times food banks take in that, and then local churches or other nonprofits are the ones to distribute it. And I will tell you, if you have that resource of cash or extra food on your hands and can make donations right now, they are in desperate need of it. And vice versa, if you're on the receiving end, now is the time to reach out. If there's no shame in needing some help right now. There's many in that boat. And so on both ends, absolutely take advantage and make sure that you're getting your needs met, as well as maybe if you have enough, you're reaching out and helping others. I think this is a great opportunity to reach outside ourselves and really do something to support our community and our neighbors.
Thank you, Mary. We had another question on the stimulus, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. My understanding is that the stimulus is technically a 2020 tax credit that can be prepaid based on your 2018 or 19 income. So basically, if you qualify either in 18 or 19 or 20, you'll get the stimulus payment. If you do not qualify in 18, 19, or 20, then you'll miss out on the stimulus payment. So if any of those 3 years, your income, your AGI is within the bounds, you receive the payment. The reason for that is they understand unemployment will be high this year, and a lot of people that perhaps made $250,000 last year might be in a situation where they make half or less than that next year. So that's kind of how
add something in there too. You don't need to do anything, at least the way the bill is currently written. Again, it's not a finalized deal yet. It still needs to go through the House, and then the president needs to sign off on it. So please make sure and be checking news sources for this. But as it is written right now, you don't need to do anything. If you filed taxes in 2018 or 2019, it will show up in your bank account as a direct deposit. If you get a paper check, it will show up in the mail. The only reason you'd want to reach out right now is if you've moved recently, you want to update them if you're not going to get a direct deposit, if it's going to change into that. So don't worry so much on that. Let Congress and the executive kind of take over and decide that. If you did not file, but you received Social Security and you're either on retirement or disability, but don't have enough income to file, then you still will receive payments on that. That is part of the package as it rolls out now.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm going to skip over a couple of investment questions because there's a lot that goes into your personal asset allocation and what's appropriate for you. Though I would recommend talking with an investment professional on that. I will go to a question. I'm a college student working a part-time job. Will I receive a stimulus check? And the answer to that, as far as I know, if you have a Social Security number and you have filed a tax return in 18, 19, or 20, you will receive a stimulus check. Though the House and Senate and executive need to go through that. There was originally a provision that might have eliminated your check if you were lower income. That provision is not in the current legislation that's going through. So that's kind of it. One more question on the current stimulus package. So at $75,000 of AGI, which is called your adjusted gross income, you start getting phased out of that stimulus. And at $98,000, you're completely phased out for an individual taxpayer. And again, the House and executive still are going to take a look at that bill. All right, so here's another one. Okay. If food banks are closed or limited due to social distancing, Mary, this is probably for you. What alternatives to food insecurity and alternative solutions might be available for people?
This is important to reach out into your community. So yes, there is the social distancing. What I am seeing currently is what they're having people do is go in 1 or 2 at a time, keeping that 6-person distance. So they're still open a lot of times, but you'll need to reach out in your local community and find out what's going on in terms of that. I know that locally churches and nonprofits still have their doors open. They did get rid of, at least I know locally, some of the things they used to give out clothes and toys and all kinds of things. Right now, they're really just giving out the essentials. So they're giving out food, diapers, possibly cleaning supplies if those are available. That's what's most essential, and that's kind of the item of prioritization for these food banks. So you need to reach out. I would start with your county. If you're in a case that you need something along that way, start with your Department of Social Services. There's a phone number, or you can just go online. I gave you the DOL address for resources in your community. And then you can also Google and ask around about churches and nonprofits. But everything's going to be very local instead of a big federalized or national response.
Well, and with that, we're going to go ahead and take one more question, and then we'll get started. So we do have a comment from our University Extension expert, Kathy Sweedler, who is just awesome. And she says, in Illinois, call 211 anywhere and ask for food assistance. You'll be referred to local temporary school districts that may be providing lunches and food to children. Thank you, Kathy, so much for that wonderful comment here at the end.
Thank
We will
you.
be
And yeah,
putting
Craig,
this-
that's true that schools, sorry to jump in, but yes, schools right now, many of them are keeping their doors open to make sure people are getting fed. And you do not have to have a child necessarily in school. You might have to pay a nominal amount, but you can receive food at a school a lot of times in many states.
So I've gotten a few questions, and I'm going to defer the answer until I read the stimulus legislation. If I'm 18, 19, or 20, and my parents are claiming me as a dependent, do I get the $1,200 or the $500? I don't know the answer to that, but I will look in and dig deeper, and I think it'll be made clear as it goes through the House and the executive. Thank you to the students who have asked that great question.
More
So
than
with
likely, they're
I
going
want
to
to
get
share
500.
that we're going to be putting this video up on YouTube. We're going to be sharing it far and wide, and if you attended today, we can email you out a link once this is up, and I hope you did enjoy what we had to say. I personally want to thank all of our contributors today. Thank you so much, Dr. Loving, Dr. Mary Bell-Carlson, Dr. Jim Peterson. I can't tell you enough how appreciative I am of your time giving back to our community today. Thank you all so much for being here, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.